For centuries, Africa's sky was an invisible border, a silent ceiling watched and mapped by powers far beyond its horizon. Satellites bearing foreign flags hovered above its deserts, recording its soil, its rivers, its people. The continent was seen, but never the seer. Until now. From Burkina Faso, a small landlocked nation with no coastline and limited infrastructure, 3 military satellites have ascended into orbit. Not as a gesture of pride, but as a declaration of sovereignty. President Ibrahim Traoré, a soldier turned strategist, put it simply, "We can see now, and they can no longer hide." This moment marks a turning point not only for Burkina Faso, but for Africa's identity itself. For decades, data surveillance and communication were controlled by others. Now, a country once defined by its vulnerability is defining visibility itself. In today's geopolitical landscape, space is the new high ground. Whoever controls the sky controls not only defense, but information agriculture trade and truth. And in that single launch, Burkina Faso did something extraordinary. It rewrote the language of power. The sky once borrowed has finally been reclaimed. Burkina Faso has no coastline, no aerospace tradition, and limited industrial infrastructure. Yet it was from this very scarcity that one of Africa's boldest technological leaps emerged. To most analysts, the idea of a landlocked Sahel nation launching 3 satellites sounded impossible, a dream too expensive, too complex, too ambitious. But for Captain Ibrahim Traoré, impossibility was never the point. Sovereignty begins with vision, he declared. This statement became both a doctrine and a challenge. For Traoré, the space program was not about matching superpowers, it was about ending dependence. Every nation that had once watched over Burkina's skies represented a history of subordination. Launching their own satellites was the quiet but unmistakable answer. We no longer borrow our view of the world. The early blueprints were drawn in modest offices in Ouagadougou. Engineers worked with recycled components, open-source navigation systems, and modular parts imported through regional partnerships. China provided technical guidance, but the direction, the command, the purpose remained Burkinabe. This was more than a technological project. It was an ideological rebellion against the myth that power must come from wealth. In reality, Traoré's launch proved something far deeper, that sovereignty begins not with what a nation has, but with what it dares to see. Every revolution has its instrument, and for Burkina Faso, that instrument was not a weapon, but a machine that sees everything. Each of the 3 satellites launched under Traoré's command carries imaging systems capable of capturing ground detail at 10 meters per pixel, a resolution once reserved for major powers. With 99% geospatial accuracy, the satellites can map, monitor, and model the terrain of the Sahel in real time. In one bold stroke, Burkina Faso transformed from being observed to becoming the observer. The partnership with China was not a dependency, but a technical alliance. Beijing supplied key modules and launch logistics, while Burkinabe scientists handled software calibration, data relay, and analytical systems. Traoré insisted on one condition: the code must be ours. No backdoors, no shared control, no foreign monitoring. For the first time, the data that flowed from the Sahel sky belonged entirely to Africa. From my perspective, this was not merely an engineering feat, it was a philosophical milestone. In the 20th century, sovereignty meant controlling land and armies. In the 21st, it means controlling information in orbit. The satellites became more than eyes in the sky. They became symbols of resistance, metal proof that a nation once written off as too small to matter could now see as far and as clearly as those who once claimed to rule it. Burkina Faso didn't just rise into orbit, it rewrote the hierarchy of sight. For Traoré, The satellite launch was never about prestige. It was about survival. In a land where drought can erase entire harvests, where borders stretch across deserts unguarded, and where illegal miners exploit land faster than the government can map it, control over the sky meant control over destiny. The satellite's mission was clear: to turn observation into action. Within the first year, data from the new constellation helped Burkina Faso increase agricultural yield by nearly 15%. By mapping rainfall, soil moisture, and irrigation patterns, the government could predict droughts and deploy water resources more efficiently. Entire regions that once depended on guesswork began planting and harvesting with scientific precision. But food was only one part of the equation. The same imaging systems detected illegal gold mining and cross-border trafficking across the Sahel. Satellite data exposed hundreds of unregistered mining sites operations that had drained the country's wealth for decades. Now, for the first time, the state could see and respond without foreign intelligence. And beyond the mines and farms, the satellites watched the nation's most fragile lifeline: water. Reservoirs, wells, and riverbeds were monitored in real time, helping planners manage scarce resources and fight desertification. From my perspective, this was where technology became patriotism in motion. The satellites were not symbols of vanity, but tools of sovereignty, instruments that turned Burkina Faso's greatest vulnerabilities into its greatest strategic advantage. Because in a world defined by who controls the map, Burkina Faso finally held the pen. For half a century, Western aid programs taught Africa a dangerous habit: dependence disguised as partnership. Every grant came with consultants. Every loan came with conditions. Every development package came with surveillance dressed as support. But with the launch of its satellites, Burkina Faso broke that pattern, decoding the machinery of dependency one orbit at a time. Traoré refused Western offers of technical assistance. Instead, the project relied on sovereign partnerships, particularly with China, under a clear principle: no debt, no data transfer, and no political clause. It wasn't about choosing East over West. It was about choosing ownership over obedience. In the words of a Burkinabe engineer at the launch site, "For the first time, the sky above us belongs to us." This was the quiet revolution Western media ignored: that a small, landlocked country had learned to build without permission. While European think tanks speculated about militarization of orbit, the real story was much simpler: a nation reclaiming control of its own vision. From my perspective, this was a strategic masterstroke. Traoré understood that in the 21st century, information is a currency. If a nation allows others to own its satellites, it also allows them to own its truth. Burkina Faso's defiance wasn't isolationist, it was autonomous. And in a world where the most powerful countries weaponize dependence, the boldest act of resistance is not war. It's self-reliance. Burkina Faso's satellites didn't just rise into orbit, they sent a signal across a continent. From Mali to Ghana, Niger, to Chad, engineers, students and policymakers began to speak the same new language: space sovereignty. In Bamako, researchers proposed a regional satellite for the Alliance of Sahel States, AES. In Ghana, a team of young scientists launched their first nanosatellite under the banner "Africa Observes Itself." For the first time, African nations were not waiting for permission, they were writing their own orbital agenda. Western analysts called it symbolic, but symbols have power. The success of Burkina Faso's program proved that access to space is no longer the privilege of empires. It's the right of any nation that dares to see. And in this awakening, Traoré's philosophy, sovereignty through technology, became the new Pan-African doctrine. African media described it perfectly: "We may have skipped the Industrial Revolution, but we will not miss the orbital one." From my perspective, this was more than cooperation, it was identity reconstruction. For centuries, Africa's maps were drawn by others. Now, Africa was drawing its own from space. The ripple, spread beyond science. It touched politics, education, even art. Universities began adding aerospace programs. Students spoke of building, not fleeing. Because when one nation proves that space is not out of reach, the horizon moves for everyone. By the time the satellites had completed their first full orbit, something irreversible had happened, not just in space, but in the minds of millions. In Ouagadougou, young students gathered at night to watch live telemetry feeds projected on classroom walls. Farmers used weather data once sold to them by foreign agencies, now freely transmitted from their own satellites. For the first time in history, the Burkina sky was mapped by Burkina hands. Traoré's decision to reach beyond the atmosphere was not vanity. It was a statement that a small African nation could defy gravity, both literal and political. And in doing so, it redefined what leadership looks like in the global south. The satellites became a mirror for Africa's potential, fragile, brilliant, and self-made. They did not simply orbit the Earth. They orbited an idea that the truest power is not given by foreign aid, but generated through self-belief, knowledge, and courage. They used to watch us from above, Traoré said. Now we watch ourselves. From my perspective, this is the birth of a new narrative, one where Africa does not wait for rescue, but engineers its own destiny. In the silence of space, 3 satellites continue to glide over the Sahel, their sensors alive, their purpose unbroken. They are not just machines. They are witnesses. And every orbit is a reminder: the era of dependence has ended. The era of vision has begun.